So hey guys, instead of seeing my face today, you are just going to hear my voice going through the slides with you. So right now we are going to be talking about section 1.3, which is scientific thinking and process, basically the scientific method. Our key concept for this section is science is a way of thinking, questioning, and gathering evidence. Our vocabulary for this section, we have observation, data, hypothesis, experiment, independent variable, dependent variable, constant, and theory. Our main ideas are, like all science, biology is a process of inquiry. Biologists use experiments to test hypotheses. A theory explains a wide range of observations, and scientists communicate information in many different ways. Our essential questions. Why is there no correct process of scientific investigation? How do experiments show cause and effect relationships? What role do hypotheses play in scientific inquiry? How can you distinguish a scientific law from a scientific theory? And why would a scientific theory be revised over time? And then lastly, what are 4 sources that might include scientific information? And again, all of the essential questions you should be able to answer by the end of the PowerPoint. So check yourself. If you can't answer these, again, make sure you contact me so that I can clarify the information for you, we can talk about it, and I can give you some extra stuff to work on. So, like all science, biology is a process of inquiry. And scientists make careful and systematic observations. They record those observations as data. It's always factual information. And from that information, they come up with a question on why something is happening. And they use that information to form a hypothesis, and they test that hypothesis by running an experiment, collect more data, analyze that data, form a conclusion, and basically the whole process starts all over. And we're going to learn later in the review video on why this isn't always just going from step to step to step. So science is a cycle, and the steps are shown in a certain order, but the cycle, like I was saying, doesn't begin or end at any one particular point. Sometimes we have to go back to making more observations. Sometimes we have to go back and adjust our hypotheses. Sometimes we have to just scratch everything and start all over. But it's a constant process of going back and forth and bringing in more evidence, all sorts of things. And biologists use experiments to test those hypotheses. And observational studies allow scientists to describe or explain something in the world. And even though those studies provide much information and answer many questions, they don't help determine the cause of the changes that they may have observed. The only way to determine the cause is by doing an experiment. So sorry about that. It wouldn't let me just go back. So scientific experiments allow scientists to test those hypotheses and find out how or why something happens. And in those experiments, scientists study factors. Those factors are called independent and dependent variables. And they use those variables to find a cause and effect relationship. So they change one thing, and that's going to affect the outcome. So those experimental studies allow scientists to determine what causes a phenomenon. And again, we have our independent variables and our dependent variables. I'm going to throw an extra one in there and call constants. But our independent variables are the things that the scientist changes on purpose. It's basically what we are testing, okay? So they're manipulated or changed on purpose by the scientist. In order to remember that, if you think that independent starts with the letter I, and I want you to remember independent because I changed it. I changed it on purpose. And the dependent variable, it depends on something. So dependent variables are what we observe and measure. It's basically the result of what happened. And then we have these things called constants. Constants stay the same. We also sometimes call them controlled variables, but constants are conditions that are always stay the same. And our independent variable affects the dependent variable. To study the effects of an independent variable, a scientist uses a control group. The control group gets everything the same that the other group would get. So they're treated exactly the same as the experimental group, except they do not get the independent variable. They use this a lot in drug studies for medications, where the experimental group would get the drug that they're testing, kind of like what they're doing right now with the vaccines for COVID. They're going to give some of them the experimental treatment, and then they would have others where they wouldn't get that and see what happens if they were exposed to the same thing. And the independent variable is changed again in the experimental groups only. The control group does not get what we're testing, but everything else stays the same, okay? A scientific theory. A theory explains a wide range of observations. A scientific theory is a proposed explanation for a wide range of observations and experimental results that is supported by a wide range of evidence. Now, we can't 100% say that it happened. It proposed answers to scientific questions and provides explanations of things that we cannot actually perform an experiment on. But we have a lot of factual information to back it up. We've gathered a lot of evidence to back it up, but you just can't run an experiment to test to see if it would actually happen. And theories actually can change based on new evidence. A scientific law defines relationships that are absolutely valid anywhere in the universe, and you can actually test this. So a law defines the relationship, the theory actually explains it. So, for example, the law of conservation of energy states that energy may change form, but it's not created or destroyed. And that's a law, we know it, but it doesn't say why. The theory would explain why. So a law describes without giving any explanations. Here I want you to just look at the scientific theory versus a scientific law. And again, the scientific theory explains why it occurs. The scientific law describes what's happening. Now, scientists communicate information in many different ways. And new scientific information is reviewed by other scientists through a process called peer review. And during peer review, scientists consider many things on like how the experiment was performed. Does data support the conclusion? Was there any bias in the design of the experiment? Like, was the actual person doing the experiment getting paid to do that experiment by a company that's trying to manufacture a new drug? Was there any reason they would want that to be approved? And peer-reviewed scientific information is published in scientific journals, and this is considered a very highly reliable source. So we consider this a primary source of scientific information. If you look at an article and it is in a scientific journal, you can guarantee it's been double-checked, triple-checked, all by different scientists to make sure it is true and reliable information. So almost all of our scientific knowledge presented to us from the public or to the public comes from a secondary source. We don't go around reading scientific journals. We read articles in different magazines. And so secondary sources summarize or report only portions of those scientific journals, so portions of primary information. And some of these include magazine articles, news reports, textbooks, and advertisements. They're all examples of secondary sources. Not that they're not reliable as well, they're just coming from that primary source. So basically, this was a little intro into the scientific method and a little bit surrounding the scientific method. I'm going to have you watch a little short video about this and then complete a worksheet. But again, please go back to those essential questions at the beginning and try to answer those in your notebook for me. Again, if you can't answer them, let me know so I can give you additional help. All right, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.